Hey, everybody, this is Matt Rogers. I am the Vice President interim of Denver Field Ornithologist. I am new into this role, so just getting my feet wet. I've attended a couple meetings and enjoyed working with really great people so far, and I look forward to influencing the organization with some of my ideas. A little bit of background for myself. I work for the United States Space Force over at Buckley Space Force Base. I run the environmental shop and the civil engineering squadron, and that includes natural resources. And I do have a Fish and Wildlife Service person on staff. At some point, I may talk to y'all a little bit more about what I do over there. But I am in the environmental field. The environment is my passion for the environment has driven my career and personal life in more ways that than I can illuminate. Certainly, right now, a couple things that I'm going to focus on in my role as vice president is increasing diversity and inclusion in the organization. I'm also passionate about backyard birding, and I'm in the process. It's been a years-long process of doing a makeover on my backyard and going to native plants and certainly bird-friendly plants. So just a couple of things that I'm interested in.
So I'm Mary Taylor Young. I've been writing about wildlife and birds, a lot about birds in Colorado and the American West for 35 years. I've been around forever. I first got to know Bill when he and I were board members at Denver Audubon. Gosh, I think that was back in the 90s. Anyway, I wrote, a lot of folks might remember my Words on Birds column for the Rocky Mountain News that ran for 16 years. I published 22 books written for Parks and Wildlife. Anyway, yeah, I have a degree in zoology from Colorado State. I'm originally from Loveland, but my dad, I'm an Army brat. My dad was a career Army guy, so I actually wasn't born in Colorado, but fell in love with it. So I spent every summer here. And when Dad retired, we moved back to our family home in Loveland, and I've been here since. People are probably familiar with some of my books, The Guide to Colorado Birds, Colorado Wildlife Viewing Guide. I wrote the Centennial History for Rocky Mountain National Park, big coffee table book called Rocky Mountain National Park, the First 100 Years. And another well-known book of mine is Land of Grass and Sky, A Naturalist Prairie Journey. So right there around Lamar. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming to hear me talk about my new book, which is also a personal narrative. It's not a field guide about bluebirds. It's called Bluebird Seasons, Witnessing Climate Change in My Piece of the Wild. And I am going to share a PowerPoint program with you, and I will take you kind of on a journey with me through writing that book, how I came to write it, and what all I have to say. Hope everybody's able to see that. So again, thank you so much for having me and inviting me to join you to be your guest speaker. You know, in the course of my career writing about wildlife, I've written a whole lot about birds, but an awful lot about all kinds of other wildlife, from bats and bears, lizards, snakes, an awful lot about threatened and endangered species. I've covered a lot on wildlife research. I actually have an upcoming article in Colorado Outdoors about least turn delisting, which is actually quite interesting because our least turns, you probably know, aren't doing very well. So delisted in the rest of the country, but still a lot of concern here in Colorado about them. So my new book, Bluebird Seasons, Witnessing Climate Change in My Piece of the Wild, is it's a different kind of an effort for me. It's a very special book because it's a story from the heart. It's my personal story. It's a story of my family and our special place in Southern Colorado, and all that I have seen changing there over the years. I've kept a journal for over 25 years down there, which, as many of you probably know, journal keeping it's quite an interesting process. And in the end, what you didn't realize you were recording is very eye-opening and fascinating. So again, as I kind of take you on the journey through my story, I hope that you will think about what is happening in your special places, in your backyard, how a changing climate is changing those special places. And then I hope you'll think about ways to share your own story. So one Sunday morning in 1995, my husband and I were sitting having coffee. It was August. We, at that time, lived in a 100-year-old farmhouse in East Denver. And I was reading the newspaper, or we were actually printed newspaper, and it had actual classified ads. Oh my gosh, the dark ages. And I saw a display ad for land for sale west of Trinidad in southern Colorado. And so I said to my husband, oh my gosh, let's go. And, he's a very indulgent husband. He gave me one of those, yes, dear kind of responses. And indulgently, we drove down to go take a look at land. Now, where we were going is, as I said, west of Trinidad, which is just a little bit north of the New Mexico border, and then 12 miles west from Trinidad. So you might ask, why did we drive 3 hours south to go look at land for sale? And the easy answer to that is we're just average folks. Land in the Central Mountains and west of Denver, west of the Front Range, was just too expensive for us. Land in southern Colorado was a lot less expensive. So south we went. And it was a really different landscape than the high mountains. And also, the montane foothills west of the Front Range. It's a landscape dominated by pinyon pines and juniper. So that's that PJ landscape. With ponderosas towering in wetter areas and intermixed with grassy meadows and rocky canyons. And we just fell in love with it. It's a very diverse, wonderful landscape, a lot of natural foods for all kinds of wildlife because of the pine nuts, the juniper berries, acorns, huge insect community, a lot of wildflowers, grasses, etc. So it can be a very rich and abundant habitat. And we fell in love with it. I think the very first, I talk about it in the first chapter of my book. We're out looking, we're out in this meadow. And this actually is one of our meadows. The view in the back is Raton Mesa. High point there is Fisher's Peak, site of the newest Colorado State Park. So we have an eastern looking view. But we were walking around and then I noticed bluebirds flying around. This was August, but they were still about and busy somewhat. Probably maybe some late clutches. And then also there was a piles of elk scat out in the meadow. And, I remember kind of kicking at him with my boot. And then my husband's, I know he's thinking, oh, elk scat, this is the one that's going to make her decide she wants this property. Because, he always says, I'm one of the few people he knows who gets excited at animal poop. So, and I do. So anyway, I did wrestle with the idea of buying land because, of course, I'm concerned, like all of us, in overdevelopment of open landscapes. But I also had this feeling that my state was kind of being bought out from under me, and that access to open areas to, watch wildlife, go birding, etc., we're shrinking. So also that thing of, well, it's already going to be sold, so we might as well buy it. So yeah, we went ahead and bought the land, and I was just determined to be a really good steward of that land as much as I could be. So we bought 37 acres of land. It's essentially the eastern foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So as I mentioned, with all the natural foods, there's abundant and diverse wildlife. I love this prairie lizard peeking out between the steps of up to our kitchen door, and then a male western bluebird with lunch for the kiddos, and then just all kinds of wildflowers down there. Sand lilies are usually the first flower to bloom, just like around here, around Denver. For a birder and a naturalist and a zoologist, did I mention that I have a degree in zoology from CSU? But it was really just a wonderland and a wonderful opportunity. I didn't have to go out chasing around, go to different places. Sometimes, as we all know, your best birding can be sitting on the deck in a good place with your cup of coffee in the morning and your binoculars. So I did a lot of that. I still do a lot of that. Over the years, our bird list kept growing, and something over 200 species on our land and in the surrounding area. And we cheat and allow ourselves to count down to Long Creek, which used to feed into the Purgatory. It feeds into Form Trinidad Lake, to give us a little more diversity of birds. But that bird list, it would become quite interesting over the years. So in 1995, the year that we purchased, climate change was already well underway, but it wasn't really on the public's radar much. It wasn't really on my radar much. I was mostly writing about wildlife conservation and threatened and endangered species. But 1995 was the hottest year to date. At that time, the hottest year on record, since records had started being kept in 1856. We all know that tragically records been broken repeatedly in recent years. And also the climate change report stating that the evidence suggests definitely a discernible human influence on the Earth's climate. So when I was doing my research, I came upon a really interesting quote, and it's this one from Senator John Chafee of Rhode Island. He was quoted in a report, Ozone Depletion, the Greenhouse Effect and Climate Change, where he said, "This is not a matter of Chicken Little telling us the sky is falling. The scientific evidence is telling us we have a problem, a serious problem." And the key thing to note here is the date, June of 1986. So it's not like we haven't had warning. So we bought our land and we immediately started camping down there. And I instantly, of course, started keeping a nature journal. Right off the bat, it was just lists of sightings of species, not just birds, but mammals, reptiles, amphibians, invertebrates as well. But, pretty quickly, we were just seeing so much fun and interesting stuff and, behaviors, whether it was coyotes playing like Labrador retrievers out in the meadow at dawn, or, finding mountain lion tracks in the mud, or a lot of bear tracks, of course. And watching these hunting spiders emerge from these burrows in the ground with their backs covered with tiny little baby spiderlets, just really quite fascinating. So the journal expanded to just every time we were down there, because we live in the Front Range in Douglas County, but we would go down and everything we saw we would record. New things, and that way we could keep track of changes when we were seeing what species showing up and departing. So very fun. By 1998, when our daughter Olivia was born, camping on our land had become increasingly too much work. So we would set up this elaborate campsite. We'd have our tent, we'd have a pup tent for the dogs. We have a picnic table. Then we had to put the canopy up over the picnic table. And then we had the fold out camp kitchen from Coleman and the hammock and blah, blah, blah. So it just, with a baby, it just got to be too much work to set that up and then take it down and then make sure we left a very clean campsite, because it's very abundant bear population down there. So we determined that we needed to go ahead and build a cabin. So we decided by 1999 we were ready, and we began building a log cabin. Now again, we are just average folks. We didn't have a whole lot of money. We couldn't hire a contractor to build it, so we built it ourselves, and we talked, coerced, arm twisted friends and family, anybody who could, to come down. People came down to stay, a couple of days, a week, and we basically did like an old-fashioned Amish barn raising, and it was really fun. So for 3 weeks in June, we had this great big group camp. People brought their tents and their tent trailers, and we had a big camp kitchen. It was in late June, at the time of the summer solstice, so we had light till 9 p.m. We just all worked together really hard, stacking the logs, pounding the spikes, starting to put up the framing walls in the interior. And then I'd make big meals of stew or spaghetti or whatever, and we'd sit around the campfire at night and have a beer and enjoy our meal. And it was just really an exceptional experience. So what we had 3 weeks that we're both able to, my husband and I were able to get down there. So we had 3 weeks to get the log walls raised, to get the roof on, the windows and doors in, and get the cabin, what's called dried in, so that we could drive away. And, lock the doors, it'd be watertight, etc. And we did it. We managed, we got our log cabin up and dried in on our schedule. And we spent the next few months through Thanksgiving finishing the interior. And so we were able to have a Thanksgiving celebration in the cabin, in our new cabin, in November of 1999. So once we had our little log nest box, I right away put up 4 nest boxes for bluebirds. That would have been spring of 2000. So we had 4 nest boxes up, ready to receive bluebirds, and we had nests in all 4 of our boxes that first year. Eventually, over the years, we added boxes until we've maintained a bluebird trail of 10 boxes winding up through our meadows. And you can I love this little map. My husband's an artist. I guess that's lucky. So he sketched our land with where our cabin's located and all the nest boxes. Now, we lose 1 or more boxes to bears every single year. And I learned early on that the bear is smarter than me when I put a second box up where the first one had been knocked down, and guess what happened? It got knocked down right away. So the bears are smarter than me. So anyway, we move them around, but we have tried to maintain 10 boxes as much as we can. Now I'm going to give a quick shout out to Kevin Corwin and the Colorado Bluebird Project for making what I think by far are the Cadillac of bluebird nest boxes. Those have by far been our most successful boxes. With so many boxes knocked down, we nail them back together and fix them as much as we can. But we have ended up buying some online, and those are just never as expected. They really aren't the best dimensions, etc. So anyway, the boxes from Colorado Bluebird Project, definitely the best. So our nest box trail and the bluebirds and their lives really became a focus for our time down at the cabin. I mean, there was plenty of other things we paid attention to, but somehow bluebirds and their lives were sort of a pole star for us. It was so fun to see when they would come back in the spring and have our boxes ready for them, and to check our boxes as discreetly as we could and carefully. and just to kind of pay attention to what happened to them each season and in succeeding years. And as it turned out, what was going on with bluebirds really was becoming a barometer of what was happening on our land, and of course, throughout the state and everywhere, really globally. So that second year, we put up a fifth nest box, and it was very quickly occupied by this bird, an ash-throated flycatcher. There's 6 lovely ash-throat eggs. I'm not sure whose white egg that is. A couple of guesses, but obviously not a cowbird. It's not big enough. So it was very fun to start to have some surprises in those boxes. Now, the next year we put up another box, and we had another surprise. Violet green swallows occupied a box, and I just love swallows. They're such beautiful birds. I mean, it was just very fun to have them swooping and hunting in our meadows, and then to have them nesting close enough. I mean, obviously they were nesting in our forests already because they were violet greens, you know, all over. But to have them actually in our nest box where we could kind of keep an eye on them and monitor them. We've had various surprises throughout the years. We pretty regularly now have mountain chickadees, and then white-breasted nuthatches. And remember how I said I bought the low-grade boxes online? Well, those are the boxes I realized when I actually measured them that they were smaller and the entrance hole was smaller. So no wonder we started getting the smaller birds. Anyway, but it does keep it fun and interesting. We've had a ton of other surprises in our boxes, from false nests built by male wrens to spiders taking over with a lot of webbing. Once we opened a box to check on a nest, and there was a big handsome bull snake coiled up in there and hissing at us. And I was like, yikes, at least it wasn't a rattler. And we've also had repeated invasions by pinion mice, which are a deer mouse species. But they're really, really good climbers, and they're primarily found in PJ. So especially in wet years, when they're kind of flooded out of their ground dens and nests, they climb the trees and get into the nest boxes. They won't do that when the birds are in there, but that's why every year, late summer, early fall, when we're past any possible late clutch, we clean out our nest boxes. We were just down there last week. We cleaned out all our nest boxes, propped open the doors to be sure that the mice didn't get in, because otherwise in the winter, they really get in there. So for 15 years, Western bluebirds and occasionally mountain bluebirds were the headliners in our boxes in terms of nesting. You know, we just have beautiful bluebirds flying around our meadows. I love to watch them hovering, hunting, and then, you know, dropping down to grab an insect for the kids. And then, you know, the fun thing of seeing fledglings on a branch, you know, speckle-breasted, and all, when an adult comes in all fluffed up and squawking, feed me, and, you know, exhausting the adults, feeding these great big squawking babies. Which my image is always, you know, they're like teenagers who graduated from high school, but they're still hanging out on the couch watching TV. And, you know, Mom, will you get me some chips? So until finally the adults are like, you know, get a job, and they quit feeding them. And then the babies figure out, oh, okay, you know, I got to live as my own independent adult bluebird now. So in terms of our counts, we've kept a record of our nest counts as much as we can year to year. We aren't down there on a, you know, like clockwork. So there are some years when we're only down there a few times, some years we're down there a whole lot. But pretty much from the records I've been keeping, over those first bunch of years, bluebirds averaged 2/3 of all the successful nests in our boxes. But by 2017, things definitely seem to be changing. when I looked back and quantified our nest data, 2017 was the last year that bluebirds made up at least half of all the nests in our boxes. And naturally, the success rate moves up and down as it would year to year. But by 2021, bluebirds were down to averaging only 14% of the total nests in our boxes. So they definitely seem to be on a downward trajectory. But of course, you know which bird was going in the opposite direction, and that was the ash-throated flycatcher. Since 2017, ash-throats have accounted for 40% of all our nests on average. I can't state exactly the reason for that, but of course I began to say, what the heck is going on? This definitely seems to me to be linked to climate change in a drying climate, because ash-throats are arid country birds. They prefer drier, warmer habitats, more open landscapes. So in 2019, National Audubon Society published an amazingly detailed report you're probably familiar with called Survival by Degrees. In that report, they project that ash-throated flycatcher populations will remain stable even despite the most dire climate change scenario of a 3 degrees Celsius temperature rise, and that they are actually projected to increase their summer range by 42%. This 2016 Second Colorado Breeding Bird Atlas reported a 4% per year increase in the populations of ash-throated flycatchers, of course, just in Colorado. And the 30% increase in ash-throats between the first Colorado Bird Atlas in 1998 and the second in 2016. So pretty big jump. And Western bluebirds, they're going in the opposite direction. Western bluebirds are projected to lose 35%, more than a third, in other words, of their summer range under the most dire climate change model. And violet-green swallows, the Audubon report describes them as moderately vulnerable, that they would projecting that they will lose 42% of their summer range under the most dire climate model, and 28% under less severe. But under either scenario, they will disappear from our land. And we definitely seem to be seeing that trend. We have not had a confirmed violet-green swallow nest in any of our boxes since 2014. Now, at this point, I want to stress that my journal entries are anecdotal. This is not rigorous scientific data. If anything, it could be called citizen science. Some years, as I said, we're only down there a few times. Some years we're down there a lot. And of course, there are variations season to season, year to year. But still, I feel that the trend over 25 plus years is really pretty obvious that for bluebirds, based on my nest box counts, it's a downward trend. So there are a lot of other changes going on our land, and I realized it was all recorded in my journal. In 2001, I was scrambling up a rocky cliff at the back of our land. We call it the thumb because it's shaped like a thumbprint on the topo map. When I was writing the book, I was like, why didn't we come up with something like a lot more dramatic? Lizard Head Peak and, Mount Massive, but no, it's the thumb. But anyway, I looked up and I noticed something that was quite a few dead pinyon pines up on top of the cliff. And they sort of had these bony silhouettes against the sky, very dramatic, but very concerning. We began to notice more and more dead pinyons around. And I was like, what the heck is happening to the pinyon forest? And I asked around, I asked the CSU extension people down in Trinidad, and nobody seemed to know anything. But as it turns out, pretty quickly, people were realizing that pinyon pine forests throughout the Southwest were being devastated by the Ips pine beetle. So one of the many species of pine beetle that are a part of the system. They're inhabiting the trees always, but when the trees are stressed, like by drought, they're less able to fight off the insect pests. And some years, the pines in our area have been rated as having a lower moisture content than kiln-dried lumber. So very dried trees and landscape, very much favoring the beetles. Drought hit us, of course, like all of Colorado and all of the West. It's interesting that in this year, when we've been so rainy and wet up here in the Front Range, it's been very dry down there. So I'm kind of in this little weather bubble, I guess. Some summers, the meadows, when we'd walk through them, they'd be nothing but dry, crackling brown grass. Clouds of dirt would puff up around our boots when we walked. And we would often see, I don't want to say often, we would sometimes see the glow of wildfires in the distance, kind of that rosy glow at night. And an oily fog of smoke would drift across Raton Mesa and block out our view. And then there were times when our meadows would be filled with smoke and we would have to, make the decision to beat a retreat. We've fortunately, hopefully, done what we need to do to fire safe our land, cutting a fire break around our cabin and that sort of thing. Other changes were happening also. New birds began to show up. So roadrunners. Everybody loves roadrunners. They're fascinating birds. We think of them as a desert bird, but of course they do inhabit southeastern Colorado. That's the northern edge of their range. Pardon me, I'd seen roadrunners around Trinidad, and apparently they are very rarely spotted clear up at our elevation, which is 6,700 feet. So one summer, after I'd seen roadrunners around Trinidad before, as I said, but then I spotted one on the county road as we drove in one year. And then a few years later, there was one out in our meadow near our driveway. And then I began to, hear stories from neighbors who live down there all the time, talking about increasing sightings of roadrunners, all their jokes about Wile E. Coyote and all that kind of thing, but still pretty concerning. So that the Survival by Degrees report from Audubon projects that with a 3°C temperature rise, roadrunners will expand northward along the Front Range by 27% by 2080, becoming established almost as far north as Denver. So then now let's talk about scaled quail. Scaled quail are a fairly common bird in southeastern Colorado. Again, it's the northern edge of their range. They're popular game bird. They're common below 4,500 feet. They're very rarely seen up to 5,500 feet. But several years ago, we spooked a covey of about 15 quail at 6,700 feet. So that was, quite a jump, not in the previous data at all that I could find. So under the most dire warming scenarios, scaled quail are projected to gain range across eastern Colorado and then moving northward clear up into Wyoming and expand up into the foothills and higher elevations on the eastern slope. So I think our journal data shows that trend is already happening. So there are a lot of other changes that we are seeing. The elk down there spend summer up in the high country where eating lush mountain grass, and then they move down slope to winter around our elevation. Many years in the fall, we'd have big groups of elk out in our meadow. We even called it Elk Meadow, and we would hear bugling. But I realized, my husband and I would say, gosh, you know what? We just don't see those big groups of elk anymore, and we don't hear bugling as much. And we were really, missing seeing that Elk Meadow didn't have much in the way of elk. So that there are studies that are showing that because of a warming climate and upslope movement of some vegetation, that elk are staying in the mountains in the high mountains later into the season, they're moving downslope later in the fall. And I think that's contributing to us seeing fewer of them. There, I think, are some other things going on, like fragmentation of habitat because of natural gas wells and such. But I still think we're seeing some changes with general elk movement patterns. Another thing that I began to notice evidence of bears activity later into the fall, late fall and into winter. It's not unusual, of course, for bears to emerge from hibernation and kind of, move around a bit, but then they re-enter hibernation. But what they don't do is when they emerge, but go back in other words, when they emerge in midwinter, they don't rev their system up. So they're not feeding, they're not defecating and urinating. So I was really surprised when 2 or 3 winters ago, I found fresh bear scat out by our cabin in January. So it was not a super warm winter. Of course, they delay their entrance into hibernation depending on conditions, but to find fresh scat out in January told me that bear had never entered hibernation. So I do think we're seeing changes on our land in bear life cycle activity. And that's also being borne out by studies by CPW and other groups. But the most dramatic and tangible change we have seen is the change in our dominant hummingbird species. We've been noticing this actually for a while. So when we first were down there, the wonderful trilling broad-tailed hummer was our dominant hummingbird. Absolutely no question. But over the years, we began to say, you know what, I think we're seeing fewer broadtails and we're seeing more black-chinned hummingbirds, which is a more southerly ranging bird. I have a friend from Arizona who says, oh yeah, that's a desert hummingbird. Well, I mean, they are across southern Colorado. That's, that's not unusual. But we were definitely seeing increases. Some of the entries in my journal are like, wow, we didn't see a broadtail, until the second or third day after we had put out our feeders, or some short entries were like all black chins these days. So definitely more and more the black chin hummingbird is the dominant nesting hummingbird species that we have down there. So survival by degrees, the Audubon report lists broad-tailed hummingbirds as a bird of the highest vulnerability to climate change. That's certainly very concerning news. Under that most dire climate scenario, the model projects that broadtails will see a 69% loss of range throughout North America. And even if it's just a 1.5 degree temperature rise, they will face a 45% loss. But under either scenario, broad-tailed hummingbirds will very likely disappear from our land by 2080, and also from probably 19% of Colorado, including from some of the highest, coolest elevations in the mountains. But the black-chinned hummingbird is already expanding its range in our state, as the models predict. The second Colorado Breeding Bird Atlas in 2016 reported black chins moving northward and eastward. That reports of black chins increased 30% between the first Colorado Bird Atlas survey in 1998 and the second one in 2016. Under the scenario of greatest warming, Audubon's model projects that black chins will expand their summer range by 62%, so pretty much to across most of Colorado, when they have historically been a bird limited to southern Colorado. So pretty concerning. That makes me very sad to think that, we might not hear the trilling of broadtails anymore. So I like this quote that many bird species are predicted to occupy new ranges as a result of climate change. The unassuming black-chinned hummingbird is thought to have begun a climate-mediated range shift already. Yep, they have. So I didn't set out to become a witness to climate change. I was just keeping my nature journal and having fun with it. But I realized as I began to put all these pieces together of what was going on and what we were seeing, that I couldn't have chosen a piece of land that better represented all the many chapters of climate change, of the climate change story. So really our land tells a saga of climate change kind of in microcosm. It's been a site of a century of fossil fuel extraction because it's major coal mining in southern Colorado. We're seeing extremes of weather, increasing drought, species change, increasing threat of wildfire. And, I realized that this landscape that shows so many of the impacts of climate change now was a party to creating it. And the ironic, circular nature of that story is just, it's upsetting, and it's just ironic. And of course, we unknowingly captured the evidence of all of this in our journals, so that there was I realized there was this sort of hidden thread winding through our entries. And so those sightings, they're just really sightings and raw data, but of climate change. So our land in southern Colorado is in what's known as the Raton Basin. It's been the site of coal mining, as I said, for almost 100 years. And now it's a site of enormous natural gas extraction. As a matter of fact, we learned that our land sat over a big coal mine when a neighbor drilled a well, and they hit water pretty quickly, and their driller said, well, let's go a little deeper to ensure your water supply. So they drilled deeper. Oops, they punched through into the mine and all their water drained out. So that was a pretty expensive discovery of what lay under the land. So I took a look at the Google Earth images of our land, and this, appalling as it is the network of gas wells with their access roads all throughout our area. So the large drainage going from upper right down to sort of central, to the left center, that's Long Creek, which drains into the Purgatory and creates Trinidad Reservoir at Trinidad Lake State Park. So we are up above this a little bit, but you can just see this monstrous web. I call it they're like fungal hyphae. If you've ever seen how the threads of fungus spread, that's just what made me think of. So I did so all those little dots are the well pads, and then you can see the roads accessing them. I counted at least 264 gas wells within a 5-mile radius of our cabin. 115 acres of forest and wildlife habitat and carbon uptaking, oxygen emitting green vegetation, that's all been lost and cleared to brown dirt with those roads and those well pads. And I just extrapolated because I know the size of the well pads, and I estimated the lengths of all those roads. So put that all together, and that is a very daunting thought, 115 acres. But obviously it's not one straight contiguous piece. Instead, that's spread across the landscape, fragmenting habitat and creating barriers to wildlife movement. So not a pretty sight. So you probably know that that's me. Don't laugh. So that's, you probably know that climate change is viewed as probably having the potential to bring on the 6th mass extinction in Earth's history, and that the 5th mass extinction was about 66 million years ago. That's when what's the accepted theory is that a massive asteroid struck Earth, created enormous changes in the climate, blotted out the sun, killed off all the photosynthesizing green plants and everything that relied on that, which means almost everything. and wiped out the dinosaurs. And the mark of that ancient cataclysm is about a 1-inch chalky geologic layer that's called the KPG boundary. You may remember it used to be called the KT boundary. And in the book, I discuss why it's all so goofy in terms of its name. But anyway, so the KPG boundary is really only visible in a few places. And one of them is at Trinidad Lake State Park, about a mile and a half down the hill from us. I'm pretty sure that it's on our land too. I just haven't been able to find it. I explore in our eroded arroyos where we've got coal seams and such, and I have my eyes open. I'm going to find it. But again, that irony that as we are facing this 6th extinction, the evidence of the 5th extinction is right here, and it's right here on our land. But, I realize that if I'm a witness to change, that I am also a witness to lessons that can help us face it. Because in my journal are countless stories of recovery and renewal, bad years when nests failed horribly and either the adults weren't able to nest at all or hatchlings died in the nest. They would be followed by good years where the adults might have multiple clutches of young babies and just filling the meadows with song and color and activity. So while my book and my story might seem to be about loss, I feel that this is actually a story of hope. Because my piece of the wild is under grave threat, but it's still a place that's full of wonder and joy and renewal. This April, we were down at our cabin and we decided we better, make sure all the nest boxes were closed up, which we'd already closed them, but just kind of do a tour, see if we had any activity. And we had one new bluebird nest with beautiful blue eggs in it, and new growth was coming up through the meadows. And it was like the bluebirds are back, they're carrying on, we're in the process of carrying on. And that in spite of drought and wildfire and all the changes, that the bluebirds still are returning every spring to get on with the business of life. And, I kind of take that as the bluebirds are not giving up. Nature is not giving up. So we can't give up either. We have to see hope and work for it. There's just so much that we can still do to make sure that we have endless bluebird seasons into the future instead of giving up on them. I see hope in several ways. I see it in the passion of young people. It's their future. They are determined to not let their world and their future be ruined. So young people are very active in climate action groups. So I see a lot of, I see that with my daughter who's 25. She and her generation are angry that this is the state of things, and they're determined to change that. I also see hope in the ability of humans to overcome enormous obstacles. I mean, Homo sapiens is really such a quirky, flawed, but amazing species. I mean, we are capable of astounding things when we put ourselves to it. Obviously pretty astounding because look at how we've changed Earth. That means we can also overcome enormous challenges to right the course of the climate situation. And then I also see hope in probably the strongest thing, and that is the resilience of nature. Given a chance, nature persists and it survives. A great example, I live next to an undeveloped ranch, a wooded ranch in Douglas County, and in the winter they came through and they clear cut out all the oak brush understory under the pine trees apparently for fire mitigation, because that backs up to some houses. Well, after our wet spring and summer, the oak brush has already come back about knee high. So it's like, man, give it a chance, and nature is going to find its way. So my book doesn't give a list of actions to fight climate change. You can Google that and come up with a zillion suggestions, or on my website, marytayloryoung.com. I do have a link to the United Nations climate page with a bunch of 12 things that you can do in your own life to help. And I really want to stress, I'm not an expert on climate change, on climate. I'm not a climatologist, but I'm a witness. And so all of you are also. We are all witnesses to what's going on. All of you are out in the field, you know what's going on, you know your birds, you know your natural community, excuse me, and you are really able to see what changes. So I'm sharing my climate change story, and I urge all of you, when you're out in the field or just at your favorite place or even in your backyard, to notice what's going on, to make note of that, whether you keep a journal or otherwise, and then share your story as well. If we all recognize and tell our stories and speak up, then we have a voice, and we can be a part of tackling the climate crisis. So, okay, I'll do a quick pitch for my book. It is available at all booksellers. I'm sure you will recognize the locations, and all the things that I reference will be very, very familiar to you. So I'd like to just do a short reading, and then we can go to Q&A. Okay, Cabin Journal, October 1999, 9 p.m. From the dark meadow, we hear a high-pitched moaning, then bleating and mewing like souls lost in the night. Suddenly nearby, from the south, a distinct elk bugle. We turn off the cabin lights and quietly, gently ease open the door onto the porch. The autumn night pulses with music. Coyotes perform from near in the arroyo and far down Long Canyon as the song dogs gather for their nightly sing. A great horned owl hoots from the tall ponderosas below Rattlesnake Ridge. Farther off to the east comes the whinny of a western screech owl, accelerating and dropping in pitch like a ball bouncing down a flight of stairs. And from our meadow, those high-pitched moans that perplex us. A waxing half moon brightens the night, and through binoculars we make out the movement of phantoms in our meadow. Large shapes, small shapes, elk. We estimate 40 to 50 animals. The cows call to their calves with mews and bleats. To the east, to the west, the bugles of bull elk, starting low, then rising to a high-pitched screech, tapering off to chuffs and whuffs. Such a bizarre sound for animals weighing 900 pounds. Then comes a clattering sound. Is it the clashing of antlers as two bulls spar? Elk cows gather and fall in nursery herds with their calves and yearlings, feeding on the lush grass of our meadow. It's the fall rut, and bull elk are drawn here by the presence of female elk. Some of the calves and yearlings are likely their young from prior years. In this season, the bulls are impelled by the rise of hormones, their necks swollen, their antlers polished and gleaming. We often find the downed remains of low-hanging pine boughs thrashed by them in mock combat as they struggle to release some of the energy and mating angst that drives them. They bugle to lure females, expending great energy to impress the cows with their size, their suitability as sires for the young the females will carry through winter and bear next spring. In some hard winters, exhausted by the rut, weak from spending too little time feeding, bull elk do not survive. They literally die for love. But if they have mated with one or more cows, their genes will carry on and they will have succeeded in the ultimate game of life. We watch in silence this drama of phantoms, milling shapes, indistinct in the moonlight, filling our meadow. The music of elk families, the bellows of hormone-driven males. Then, after some time, who knows what triggers it? Some slight creak of the porch floorboards, the faintest of our whispers, barely heard but different from the natural music of the night, our scent carried by the slight breeze. But they are suddenly all looking at us. Dozens of heads in the shadows turned our way at the same exact angle, as if aligned by a carpenter's square. Then a bull blasts a warning scream, and they are all running west into the timber. An explosion. We hear a frantic jostling of large bodies, faint whimpers of alarm, the calls of mothers to their young, the trampling clatter of solid hooves across fallen trees at the base of Elk Ridge, incredibly loud as stealth is abandoned. The thudding rhythm of those same hooves running up through the pines, up a trail that in the next day's sunlight we will find newly churned by the pounding of many hooves. They flee, mama cows and antlered bulls, spike bull yearlings, and many small calves. In moments, the noise has faded up the ridge, and the meadow is nearly empty, but not quite. Left behind are 2 or 3 young calves, confused, bleating plaintively for their mothers. Finally, they too are gone, whether instinctively following their clan up the ridge or rescued by their mothers. It is too dark for me to know. And the meadow is once again quiet, filled only with moonlight. Well, thank you. I'll stop the share and then we can take questions. Okay.
Can you hear me at all?
Yeah, I can hear you,
Yes.
Bill.
You can. All right. Well, maybe I can give you a better introduction, a little more. I apologize for why the glitch, but I wanted to mention a better introduction for you, a more complete introduction. Some of the things that our audience should know. The number of books that you've written. You mentioned some of the field guides to birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians in Colorado, as well as the official centennial history of Rocky Mountain National Park, among many books that you've written. And you've written so many hundreds of articles for magazines like Colorado Outdoors, which many of our audience have probably read. The Colorado Wildlife Company series, which was published for 15 years by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And of course, your Words in Birds column, which ran in the Rocky Mountain News for 16 years. And all the awards that you have won, Mary, including the Frank Waters Award for exemplary literary achievement for writing that communicates a deep understanding, celebration, and love of the West, which you received in 2018. In 2019, you were inducted into the Colorado Authors Hall of Fame inaugural class, along with Stephen King, Madeleine Albright, Connie Willis, and others. And in 2020, you were awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Colorado Authors League for recognizing the outstanding work, significant contributions, and distinguished achievements of a member of the Colorado Authors League during a long and successful career in the publishing arts. So those are just a few of the things you had mentioned. That you have a bachelor's degree in zoology from Colorado State, and in addition to that, you were in 2016. You gave the commencement address for the CSU College of Natural Sciences commencement, and you're past board member of the Colorado Authors League, Colorado Book Festival, Audubon Society of Greater Denver, and Douglas Land Conservancy. You've worked with thousands of school kids throughout Colorado as a teaching artist in residence, and you were also honored to have been an artist in residence at Rocky Mountain National Park in 2012. So I also wanted to mention that you were going to our audience that Mary is going to be giving a talk on Friday, September 15th at 6:20 at the Philip Miller Library in Castle Rock, and for a book signing and a talk, along with famous Bluebird cookies. So what an attraction! You've mentioned your book, Watching Climate Change in My Piece of the Wild. In a review of Mary's of that book, Bill McKibben, author of The End of Nature, wrote, quote, "This wonderful book is faithful both in the witness to the world's beauty and to our need to act now to preserve something of that wonder and grace. It brings the bracing air of the Rockies to us all." And I think that's what you have done tonight for us, Mary, so ably, so eloquently, and so passionately. And we thank you all that you have done and continue to do to bring to express to all of us the nature, the wonderful nature that we have here in Colorado, and the need to preserve it, what we need to do. So thank you so much for your talk tonight, and we've been honored to have you. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Bill.
So if anyone has any questions, they can use the chat function on the bottom of your screen
Q&A.
to relay whatever you would like to ask Mary.
Bill, Matt asked a question in the chat directly to us. Mary, can you see that, or would you like me to read that to you?
Yeah, I can see it. Let me just read it. Or
Okay.
you want to read it to the group?
Okay. From our Vice President, Matt. Mary, I wanted to ask about the oil and gas activities in that area, as one can see myriad well pads and roads when looking at that area west of Trinidad on Google Earth. You mentioned it could be leading to disturbance of elk, but can you speak to other disturbances such as noise pollution and dust that may be affecting the ecosystem?
Yeah, all of the above. Well, so, I knew that I was aware, of course, of all the activity going on, but boy, that Google Earth image, that just hits you in the face with how fragmented that habitat is. I mean, there's plenty of corridors still for large mammals. So there's still a lot of elk down there, but I do think it's disrupting their movement patterns. Fortunately, they don't drive those roads real regularly. So for a while, when they were first constructing them, and before they put in satellite sensors to pick up data off the gas wells, there was a lot of dust problem and invasive weed problem, because those trucks are going all over the area, and they're picking up seeds and then distributing those noxious weed seeds, invasive weed seeds. So yeah, we had a real problem with, I don't know, all kinds of stuff. Goat's head, thistle, of course, sandburrs, etc. But and then also dust coating vegetation and leaves along the roadways. That's a constant problem in a rural situation anyway, when there's just oil and gravel roads. But definitely, in terms of noise pollution, I talk about that in the book, where when we first bought our land, there was nothing down there. But then, typical of Colorado, our surface rights or the mineral rights are severed from our surface rights. So those fossil fuel resources were going to be developed, and they were. So when they were drilling the wells, it was obnoxious, and at first they were very noisy. There was a low hum all the time, but then they electrified them, I think. Somehow they used the natural gas. I'm not, honestly, I don't know the specifics on it, but they really are not a noise problem in terms of the well themselves. So it's gotten better, but it definitely had its impact. I think the worst impact is habitat fragmentation and probably a lot of erosion, because we've cut the soil and put in all those roads. But great question, Matt. It's we all know it ain't just one thing ever. It's a complex network that humans are barely able to comprehend until we do it, and then we mess everything up. But I don't have an opinion on it.